Good. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and warmly welcome to From Business to Buttons. My name is Kjell. I'm the CEO at InUse. InUse has a mission, and this mission is to make life, everyday life, more easy, more enjoyable for all users. This mission, of course, is bigger than InUse itself. And this is really the reason why we have invited you all here to join us during this day together, this UX day together. When I look out here today, I have 450 committed UX people in front of me. We have the best lineup of speakers the international UX community can bring forth. Really, great UX is here, right here in this venue today. And again, warm welcome to From Business to Buttons. Also, I would like to introduce to you the moderator for today. The moderator for today is Jan Wistrand. Jan Wistrand has his roots in the newspaper world. He's been the chief editor of Sydsvenskan and Dagens Nyheter. He also has founded and is the CEO of Rapidus. Rapidus is a digital business news wire that covers the Copenhagen, Malmö area. He does many, many things. Among them is to be Sweden's most sort of moderator for different kind of business events. And actually, Jan was one of the first cornerstones of this event today. And when he said that he would come and join us, I knew that was a good omen for a great day here today. So, Jan, please take the way. Welcome.
Thank you. I tell you what, don't trust this man. He's exaggerating a lot. Welcome here, all of you. Take a look around. 450 people. Isn't that great? I thought your applause were a little weak. So now we're going to practice, okay? Good. Fine. Have you ever been to a website or read a book that's called This Day in History? Do you know about it? April 3rd. What day is it today? Perhaps anybody's birthday? Anybody? Among 450 people, somebody must be born April 3. Not? Please wave. Do you know who was born April the 3rd? If I say a person who is known as the best actor in the world ever. Who's that? Marlon Brando, born April 3. So was Doris Day. Do you know what happened 1948, April 3? American President Harry Truman signed the Marshall Plan. Do you know what happened April 3, 1973? A giant tech step in the world. In Lexington Avenue in New York, the first mobile phone call was made that time. 2004, I tried to find something interesting in the Swedish history from April 3. Didn't find so much. I found that Alf Svensson resigned as KDS party leader, April 3, which means that Göran Hägglund has its 10th anniversary as party leader today. But the main thing about April 3, 2014, is that InUse arranges the best ever UX conference. Okay, isn't it? Long ago, you asked people to close their smartphones or mobile phones when they were in a meeting. Now we ask you to use them. You see the hashtag there. If you need Wi-Fi, you use Kina Teatern as network. And then you use a hashtag you can see here. I think we have international guests as well in the room. I think we have people from Clearleft here. Do we? Where are you? There you are. Andy Budd, is that right? He's still in bed. Andy Parker? Yeah. And Miller? Hello. Feel very welcome to Stockholm. It's great that you fly into us and visit the conference. Excellent. Out in the foyer, you have people to meet as well from 3 interesting companies. You can, of course, meet the people from In Use. I think in the stand out there is Pia Karin, Cecilia, and Philip. We also have a lot of In Use people here in the room. Could you please rise? All from In Use. So all over the place, there are In-Use people to talk to. You can also meet people from 24HR, 24HR. I don't really know how to describe the company. I think I say something like it's a company that is like a living encyclopedia in digital tech. And there you can meet Matthias, Christopher, and Johan out there. Also, and last but not least, you can also meet Tweaky, Oscar from Tweaky. And I think they're actually giving away usability tests, remote usability tests, but not to all of you. So you have to hurry to Oscar to get a free usability test. Okay? Before we start the lineup of great speakers, there's some activity for you now. It's time for an ELO ranking. So please pick up your smartphones, your phones, and check the URL which is in here. And I'll give you a moment now to find the right place. There is where you're going, and we want you to rank your expectations. You get 2 alternatives time by time, one after the other. They're matching each other, and finally, the highest expectation will win. So go to the URL and start your ranking, and I give you a couple of minutes now. Does it work? Is it okay? Fine. I think you're lying, because 11 to get away from work is down at the bottom. You have to be honest now, okay? You can follow the ranking. Yeah, it's going up. Get inspired. Are you finished already? Are you? No, not all of you. I'll wait a little more. Can we have the votes from the British jury? No, I'm only joking. We don't have a French one today, I don't think so. I think we have a German. I'll return to that. Learn new ideas, to learn about topics I'm interested in, learn what strategies are currently working for others. Have fun. That is important as well, of course. So what do you think? Is it time to close the ranking now? Find customers, of course. You can get also. We've got 3,330 answers right now, and it's rapidly growing. You could perhaps go on a little while to keep on answering, and soon we will have a final result. Certainly this works as inspiration for our speakers as well. They know which expectations you have. So I think it's time to start off with our first rock star on stage. So it's a great pleasure to welcome a former vice president at Coopers in San Francisco. Now she has joined an organization and company called Patients Like Me. She has around almost 20 years of experience of both team leading and teaching in design, user experience, and from many, many different fields. And it's a great pleasure to have her here. Please welcome Kim Goodwin.
Thank you.
Feel very welcome to Stockholm, Kim.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours now.
Thanks, my pleasure. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to talk with you today about designing the way that we design. Some years ago, one of my teams was working on a medical project, big scary machines that zap cancer cells with radiation. And the CEO at this company had recently fallen in love with his iPhone. And one of the things that he said to me was, make the interface like my iPhone. Make it pretty and fun to play with. This is a machine that zaps people with radiation. We all know why that's probably not appropriate, but I bet you've all heard similar things, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, we want to put the Microsoft Office ribbon in our application, or my favorite, make my website just like Amazon. Now, chances are, if you've heard this, you offered the same response that I did, which is, you can't really take a design that was developed in one context, pick it up and plop it in another context and expect it to work. Everything we do is about context. So given that, let's consider what we do at conferences like this, the conversations that we have on Twitter. We talk to each other about our projects and our methods. We share our frustrations about all the barriers that we have in projects, things like not enough budget or not enough people and time or colleagues who are difficult. And we share advice with each other. And yet there's something missing often from that advice, and that's context. Why would we think that doing UX one way in one organization means that's going to work in another organization? So what I'd like to talk with you today about is how can the cultural context of the organizations we work with, whether we're employees or consultants, how can that cultural context drive the way we approach our projects? Because I think if we design our behavior for our work context, we're going to be more successful. That's because project issues that we tend to run into, all of those things about not enough resources and resistance from colleagues and things like that, those are all really symptoms. So the real issue is culture. The real thing that's driving all of those is the culture of the organization. And I don't mean, can you wear jeans to the office, or are you in Sweden or Norway or Denmark? What I mean is the shared assumptions in that organization and the systems and the artifacts that reinforce all those assumptions. Now, these are assumptions because they're invisible, like water to a fish. We live and breathe these things every day. There are a lot of assumptions about what matters in that organization, assumptions about who matters, assumptions about things that we can and can't do and what behavior is acceptable. And these are largely invisible to us. They're hard to detect because we live with them every day. And if you're a consultant, they're hard to detect because people don't talk about them openly, and you have to be around an organization for a little while to figure them out. Really, these things are values. They're deeply held beliefs that drive our decisions and our behavior. Now, organizational values matter a whole lot because our values are who we are. They become the user experience. There's an interesting book called The Disney Way, worth a good airplane read if you have some time. There's a story in there about how Several people check into one of the Disney resort hotels. And shortly after, they hop on a bus to go somewhere else in the park. And the bus driver says, "Hey, you're staying at one of our hotels. How's your room?" And one of the people on the bus says, "Oh, my faucet is dripping, and I forgot to tell the front desk about that." And the bus driver says, "What's your room number? I'll get it taken care of for you." The guy tells him. And then when he gets back to his room, it's taken care of. The bus driver. The bus driver has been trained to believe that his job is not to drive a bus. His job is to give guests a great experience. Now, can you imagine that happening in most places? Somebody taking responsibility for something that you wouldn't think is part of their job description? No, not so much. It's culture. It's about the values of the organization. Let's contrast this with somebody I tend to spend a lot of time with, United Airlines. United Airlines in the US is known for some customer service challenges. And so recently, they revived an ad campaign that's, 20, 30 years old, Fly the Friendly Skies. And they are getting ridiculed in the press and in the forums. People are saying, "Friendly skies? Are you joking? Are you tone deaf?" Because the thing is, you can't fake values. You can claim that something is your value, but people look at what you do. They look at how you behave. And that's how they know who you are. So, what this means is, as a group of professionals, we all have certain values that we share. Things like respecting our users' time and dignity, delight, efficiency, clarity, usability, learnability, accessibility. We all value these things, and we would probably like to think that our organizations do too. We would like to think that these are the things that drive our projects. Not so much. If we're honest with ourselves, we will admit that actually there's a different engine driving most of our projects. The organization's core values are the things that we have to hitch our trailer to, so to speak, because something else is actually the engine that's pulling those projects along. Something else is going to drive what decisions get made. And what those values are might really vary quite a bit from organization to organization. If you're in e-commerce, maybe that value is all about getting the transaction. If you're in IT, maybe that value is about protecting the data. If you're in other kinds of organizations, maybe it's about enabling the salespeople, or there may be a whole host of things. And what it says on the poster on the wall is your value may not be the real value that's driving things there. So we have to figure out what those underlying values are and really pitch the UX to those and talk about how we support those. Now, finding the real values is tricky. A couple of places I tend to look for them. One is in origin stories. I remember meeting with the CEO of a big software company once, and he was telling me, in a clearly very well-rehearsed way, about how he coded the first version of that product sitting on a milk crate in his garage. It was very clear that the idea of engineer as inventor was deeply held in this organization. And in hindsight, I realized that had our teams respected that more and really worked with them more around that value, we probably would have succeeded more with that company than we did at the time. The other big place to look for values is in, where does the money go? Where do people spend their time and their attention? How many of you have heard, "We don't have time or money to do user research"? Okay, quite a few hands. The thing that really gets me is people state that as if it's a fact. They look at you with a straight face and they say, "We don't have time, we don't have money." That is not true. There is time and there is money, it's just going somewhere else. That's not a statement of fact, it's a statement of values. So we have to pay attention to these things, and some of these values we need to work on changing, but that's challenging. Now, the first thing we have to do is question the values. When someone tells you you can't do something or we have to do something a certain way, you want to question that and figure out, is this just your individual value, or is this a value that we all share? Is this an organizational value, and is it appropriate? We have to make pests of ourselves a little bit. Now, the other thing that we have to do is figure out, once we understand the values, how can we use those? How can we work with them instead of fighting them? Because it is possible to change organizational values, but that's a multi-year project. It takes time, it takes commitment, it takes executive support in a big way. So the first step ought to be figuring out, how do we work with the values in a sort of a martial arts fashion? So one of the most important sets of values to look at is values around decision making. So if we're used to using personas to drive our design, well, what if there were sets of values that could drive how we craft our project plans? Organizational archetypes, if you will. Well, I found one model a few years back that I find really useful in considering this. It's called the Competing Values Framework. So Cameron and Quinn argue that organizations, and they've studied quite a few around the globe, make decisions based on a couple of axes. One is whether they're very accustomed to change and see that as a good thing. The other is whether they drive towards stability. Do they really seek that out? The other axis is whether they tend to be internally focused when they think about improvement, or do they tend to look outside of the organization? And they argue that based on this, there are basically 4 organizational archetypes, types of cultures around decision making. And if we can learn to work with these, I think it makes our projects a whole lot more effective. Now, real organizations, of course, are a blend of these influences. But what you'll find is that most organizations tend to be dominated by one of these styles, maybe 2, but usually just one of them. And of course, a big organization that's very complex, different parts of the organization could have different styles. So I want to introduce you to each of those styles and some ways that I've found are helpful to work with them. So the first is called an adhocracy. Sort of a weird made-up word, but if you know your Latin, it basically means we make stuff up as we go along. Okay? So adhocracies tend to be very change-oriented. They tend to look outside of themselves for inspiration. Now, if you work in an adhocracy, some frustrations that might be familiar to you are generally a lack of process. Things tend to be chaotic. People don't approach a project the same way twice. There's a lot of blurriness about roles. It's sort of unclear who does what. In fact, you might not even have job titles sometimes in an adhocracy. Lack of ownership. And if you start saying, I want to institute a new design process, there's going to be an allergic reaction to that. So I find this culture a whole lot in startups. It's very common there. Adhocracies value experimentation. They value the idea that they can respond to the market quickly. They value the idea that they're going to try things and fail and learn. And so they value people with vision. An adhocracy often is started by an entrepreneur, somebody who sees the world differently from everybody around them. And they're frustrated because not everybody else sees what they see. So if you can help them see that more clearly and help other people see their vision, they're going to value you tremendously. Adhocracies also tend to value generalists. If you say, hey, I'm kind of an all-purpose design, a little bit of research, a little bit of usability testing, I can do some of everything, they're going to love you. If you say, I specialize in remote usability testing of responsive mobile websites, they're going to look at you like, what planet are you from? In my experience, adhocracies respond well to a UX professional as whiteboard ninja. This is in some ways your most valuable skill in an adhocracy. Your ability to quickly say, let's take this amorphous idea and make it concrete so everybody can look at it and pick it apart and we can show it to users and get feedback. They'll look at your sketches like you're magical. They get all excited. You did a sketch. It's so cool. So you want to maximize the sketching, you want to maximize the user feedback, and you want to minimize talk about process. Doesn't mean you can't use process, but just don't use the word. It's kind of like putting spinach in your kid's food. Just don't tell them it's there. Now, clan cultures are very different. They're still change-oriented, but they're much more inwardly focused. One way you can recognize a clan culture is meetings by committee. It's impossible to make a decision with just 1 or 2 people in the room. You need at least 8. Nobody wants to own that decision, and they think everybody has a stake in that decision. It tends to feel like things move very slowly in a clan. Process is kind of painful. I see clans a lot in government organizations, education, sometimes in hospitals. They show up other places too, but they're very common there. There's no clear ownership. There's no one person who can make a decision without everybody around them getting upset. And conflict avoidance is pretty common as well. Sometimes in a clan culture, what I'll find is we'll have a meeting with all 18 people in it, and somebody will disagree with something, but it won't come up in the meeting, and then I'll hear about it 3 days later. Because, we want to keep everything cordial. So clans value people. They value people feeling valued. So employee satisfaction and involvement are huge. So the way to succeed as a UX professional in a clan organization is not to say I own the UX. It's to say we collectively own the UX. I just happen to have some tools that maybe not everybody else has. So being a coach and a facilitator is going to be well received in this kind of an organization. So this is the organization where you absolutely want to drag everybody out to those user interviews with you. In fact, you don't have to drag them because they'll want to come. They'll love it. Any kind of brainstorming meeting you can involve people in, that's going to be great. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have all 12 people in every meeting, but it does mean you need to be very clear with people about when are their feedback opportunities, when will they get involved. You want to minimize anything that makes people feel excluded in a clan. Now, a hierarchy is just what it sounds like. Very top-down organization, lots of structure. You see this in big, old companies fairly often. In fact, in my experience, companies tend to move kind of counterclockwise around this diagram. They start out as adhocracies. Later, they become hierarchies. Hierarchies tend to have fairly rigid process and roles. If it doesn't fit in the process diagram that's on every conference room wall, you can't do it. There are a lot of formal funding toll gates and things like that. Everybody knows who owns the project because, well, he's 4 levels up the org chart. You can see him. And they tend to be risk averse. So the idea of experimentation and failure sometimes are uncomfortable. So you have a lot of silos, lots of different departments who own different things and maybe don't talk to each other. Hierarchies value efficiency and structure. There's an operational reason why they value those things. And so what we have to do as UX professionals is help them understand that UX can be a repeatable process. We can make it feel like a thing that we're not making up as we go along. And we can show them how our work informs different decision points and reduces risk. If there's one organization that actually will say, you're the UX professional, go do your job, it's going to be a hierarchy. If there's one kind of organization where a style guide actually works, it's going to be a hierarchy. They tend to value us as process mavens. They tend to value us as experts in our roles. So, in a hierarchy, we want to maximize people's understanding that, yeah, our process actually doesn't completely break the process, it just amends it a little bit. We want to formalize things in a hierarchy. We want to make sure that we're very explicit about the decision points. And we want to emphasize the ways in which we reduce risk. The last culture I want to talk to you about is called a market culture, sort of a strange name. What it means is that they're market focused. They look externally a lot. Google, a lot of stories I hear from folks who work there make it sound very much like a market culture. Some of the challenges in this sort of place are prove it. If you say, this design will make something better, they're not really going to believe you until you can show that, which is challenging sometimes because until you build it, you don't always know. But this is definitely a place where usability test data and case studies from other places and so on are valued. They tend to have a lot of focus on competitors, so there's a Me Too effect sometimes in a market culture, sometimes detrimentally so. And there's really an emphasis on going fast, and the idea of going slow to go fast is sort of alien in places like this, so there's a lot of time pressure. Market cultures value near-term profit. They're so measurement-oriented that if the change you want to make isn't really visible and measurable in the short term, it's a tougher argument. So an architectural change or an overall change that's not measurable, you really have to put a lot of oomph behind it to get that through. So in a market culture, we need to be scientists. We need to really use data to our advantage. If you're in the web, you have an advantage here because you have analytics at your disposal. I think that if you have more of a desktop product, you have to look elsewhere for that kind of data. Look at the customer support logs and things like that to back up your arguments, because the more you can quantify, the more credible you'll be. So we want to emphasize data, and we want to minimize time and risk. So any place you can look for efficiency, you might have to demonstrate the difference between one project approach and another. Any place you can remove risk is going to be appreciated in a market culture. So if you think about these as archetypes for whom we can design project plans, you would approach a project differently in a market culture than you would in a hierarchy or in an adhocracy. And I find this really works. I had a client one time who I initially thought was an adhocracy. And so I was really emphasizing the sketches and changing quickly on the project and so on. And then I realized, we're revisiting every decision 3 times. Something is wrong here. And I realized, oh, they're much more clan-like than I realized. And then I started inviting about 8 more people to every check-in meeting. And you know what? Things moved along at a nice clip after that. So really think about the culture you're in and talk about that with your team. So you want to be a pest. You want to question the values. You want to poke at those and see, are they really the right ones for us? You want to work with the values that the organization has. Adapt your approach to design to the culture that you're working in. And finally, you want to make sure that you're not completely ruled by culture. Just because you're working in an adhocracy, that doesn't mean they can't benefit from a little bit of structure. Clans need some role definition. In a clan, you can drive the design primarily, but you have to be very careful that the way you do it doesn't exclude people. So you have to be really explicit about, here are the ways I'm going to involve you throughout the project. Show people a project plan and all of their specific involvement points so that they feel very heard. In an adhocracy, absolutely they need process. But the way I tend to talk about process in an adhocracy isn't to use the P word. It's to say, hey, I have an idea. Let's go talk to some users first. And then from that, we can sketch some ideas about what might work and see what the users think of that. And then we can work on the details. How does that sound? Well, that's process. It just doesn't sound like it, so it's okay. And then people will try it and say, oh, that kind of worked. That was good. And before you know it, it'll become our standard process. So hierarchies do need a little bit of disruption. The thing is, you have to frame that disruption in a way that feels safe and feels like part of the process. So, for example, I was working with a medical device company, and the Food and Drug Administration in the US regulates the heck out of the design process. But there's a point at which things aren't regulated, and that's project inception. That's where you're starting to come up with ideas. And so the design team in this company was having a really hard time experimenting at all. And so what we did was we inserted a stage before the inception phase that was the exploration phase, and we documented what it was, and we figured out that it could actually come before the regulated part, but because it was on the process poster, everybody felt good about it. So we put in disruption, we just structured how that disruption happened. And markets absolutely need more than numbers. Market folks will tell you, this is all about the data, it's all about the data. And I even had someone tell me once, the plural of anecdote is not data. And yet, I dragged that same guy out to a couple of user interviews, and boy, was he a believer. So, face-to-face time with users, getting out of the office, all these values that we have, that's absolutely essential with markets. So, a couple of things I'd suggest that you consider the rest of today. As you're listening to the speakers, as you're talking with your colleagues about the challenges you face, the successes you've had, share the context that you're working in. Ask about the context they're working in. When they're saying, hey, this works and that doesn't, consider what context they're coming from, and is that going to be true of your culture? Use that as a filter. When you go back to the office on Monday, talk as a team about, does one of these cultural archetypes fit our organization? And then in light of that, examine some of your recent projects. How have you approached things? Where have you run into trouble? Might it be that you're not approaching things based on the cultural context? Because other than lack of skill, that's the #1 cause I see of teams struggling to get their projects built. And think about how you might adapt that approach next time. And then finally, in the long term, think about whether the values in your organization fit your values. If they don't, and if you think that's a detriment to doing good user experience, you have a hard choice to make. You need to decide, am I committed enough to this organization to invest in changing some of those underlying values? It is possible, but it's a multi-year effort, takes a whole lot of work. Or can I not commit to that? Because if you can't, and if there's a conflict of values between you and the organization, you're going to get frustrated, you're not going to do your best work, and you're not going to serve anybody very well. Because when it comes down to it, our values are who we are, as people and as organizations. And we have to be true to them because we hold those values for a reason. So, food for thought. Thank you. Let me know what you think.
Excellent, Kim. Also excellent that you give so much time for Q&A. Very good.
Pleasure.
First question. Isn't it a pretty tough message for everybody to sort of, you give the advice that you should challenge yourself from a value perspective all the time? I mean, it's a tough process inside of you, isn't it?
It is. I think you have to think deeply. I think you have to ask yourself and your organization some hard questions. If you think about values in any aspect of life, whether that's families or politics or our work, they're things that are near and dear to us. And so they're hard to examine. They're hard to change. One exercise that I sometimes will do with a team is a sort of values continuum, if I can illustrate with you as a model here.
Sure.
Something that I like to do is make certain statements like, let's pick one. Design should be done by designers versus designers just help. Everyone owns the design. And what I'll do is I'll say, design should be done by designers on that side of the stage. Everyone owns design over here. And then I'll say, Jan, position yourself on that spectrum somewhere.
Okay.
Take a stand, right? Pick a spot, okay. And
Don't know.
I'll ask everyone
Here.
else to do that too. And so you see where people on the team stand. And it's risky asking people to make a value statement like that.
Yeah.
But then I can say, Jan, why are you standing where you are?
You sound a coward.
And chances are you'll have some reason for it, right? And then I'll ask a couple of other people. And it sounds like sort of a corny exercise, but it gets people talking about things that are really vital to us as teams, right? And so it can open some of those communication channels as long as you provide some ground rules.
I'll tell you, the team issues that Kim picks up now, we will return to them at 3:30 this afternoon in a panel discussion. Still, there are some follow-ups we can take now. And we have hand microphones for you. So please just wave. If I don't see you, people on the floor will see you, so you can come in and ask questions. Did you notice, by any chance, that how the reaction was in the room now when you spoke? What did the crowd laugh at? Mm-hmm. What did the crowd giggle at? What did they react to?
Well, I heard plenty of laughs around some of the frustrations. I think some of those are pretty familiar.
My observation is that they noticed a whole lot when you were talking about the clan culture, because it's very Swedish.
I was talking with someone at dinner last night, and I was talking about how when sometimes I'll do these exercises in workshops, and any of you who are joining me for my workshop tomorrow, we're actually going to talk about what culture you're in. I was in Hong Kong a few weeks ago, and a huge percentage of the people in the room identified as hierarchy, which is not too surprising, right? And so we got to talking at dinner last night. You know, I think that a lot of the values here in Sweden and the other Scandinavian countries are very much about collectivism, right? And very much about involvement. So that doesn't surprise me.
And perhaps hesitation to take responsibility, in a way.
You can say that. I don't know that I would.
without sort of boosting prejudice now.
Okay.
The follow-up to that is, when you travel around, when you make your speeches, do you notice nation-wise differences that are interesting? Very
seldom. I mean, like I said, I'll be interested tomorrow to see how many people identify clan as the culture they're working in. There was a strong tendency toward hierarchy with the Asian audience. Other than that, I don't know that I've seen a whole lot of difference, although I certainly have seen differences. I was doing a conference in Washington, D.C., and I noticed a lot of people identifying clan decision-making there as well, government and education and so forth. So in my experience, it seems to be more about where the company is in its life cycle and what sort of industry they're in, somewhat to do with where you are in the world as well. But again, a big company could have several different cultures within it. You know, if you work at GE that acquires other companies like crazy, chances are one of those individual companies will have some other culture there that will eventually get stamped out and turned into the GE culture over the course of several years.
Let me know if anybody wants to come in with a question. Kim, you used the word adhocracy many times, and you showed us critical factors in an adhocracy. correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was an Alvin Toffler word from the beginning, adhocracy, wasn't it?
I'm not sure, actually,
Wasn't
where
it?
that came from.
Anyway, adhocracy, shouldn't it be interpreted as an opposite to bureaucracy? Isn't it a
certainly-
very
yeah.
good thing?
It depends.
It
That's always the
depends.
answer in our industry, right? I think that... it always depends. It's all about context. Certainly, if you talk to people in an adhocracy, I think this is part of why they're so allergic to that word process, because it feels like bureaucracy. When you start talking about process, they feel like, oh, you're going to make us like a big company. You're going to make us slow and structured and constrained. So certainly there's a value, an immune system reaction to that idea of a bureaucracy in an adhocracy. That doesn't mean that it's entirely good, though. If you think about scaling an adhocracy, for example, if you tend to do projects that are very similar in nature, but you're doing them differently every time, that gets quite expensive. I think that it's hard to build buy-in in an adhocracy if you approach projects differently all the time. And so there's a lot that you can do to bring structure to an adhocracy in a way that feels good, is to keep it minimal, keep things like documentation lightweight, don't draw process diagrams, but sort of get agreement on principles and say, one of our principles is that we always talk to users before we design stuff. Principles feel okay in adhocracies, process does not. And even if your principles sort of advocate process, it tends to work okay.
Anybody here who has read the book Kim wrote, Designing for Digital Age? Yes, a few. So you have the chance to give us a 2-minute summary of the book.
2-minute summary, okay. 2-minute summary of 800 pages.
Tell them what it's all about. Tell them why they should read it.
Okay, well, my attempt with the book was to fill a need I saw in the industry, which is there's a ton of books that are about one part of the process. There's great books on research, there's great books on prototyping, there's great books on design principles and a whole bunch of other things. But nobody was really pulling that together, so that, in our industry, there are a ton of people who came into it sideways, from engineering or product management or some other career, who are trying to figure out, how do I stitch all these things together into a coherent project? And so through the lens of a particular consulting firm that I was leading at the time, so that there's a little bit of a bent to it that way, but overall I was trying to stitch that together into an approach. And I do talk in the book a little bit about adapting for different organizations, but I have to say my next version of the book is definitely going to take cultural context into account a whole lot more. But it covers everything from...
So there is a next version coming up soon, or...?
I don't know when exactly. My publisher's working on me to do it.
Okay, okay.
But I think I will incorporate cultural context a whole lot more into the next edition. Lessons learned.
Yes.
So.
Now, you have joined something called Patients Like Me.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the story. I think it's pretty interesting what they do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because having been a consultant for a long time, I wasn't necessarily looking to go in-house or anything, but this was an organization I was consulting with, and I loved their values. All comes back to values. And their value really is, how do we help patients today, help people deal with life-changing or life-threatening illnesses, at the same time that we use their data to inform medical research. And so it's sort of a twofold goal all the time. And so part of the site is about social sharing, about telling stories of your experiences with healthcare and what's working for you and not working for you. And part of it is about measurement. And so what's really interesting is user experience there is affecting the way we're designing measures. And so we're actually working on changing the science in healthcare as well.
Can you give an example?
Well, for example, right now, let's say you have multiple sclerosis. Mm-hmm. There's a measure that you fill out that tells us how your multiple sclerosis symptoms are doing. And we can compare you to other people and figure out what are you doing that's different and so forth, and use that to inform research. Now, what the site does today is it says, Jan's MSRS score is some number. Now, as another human being, I look at that and I say, what the heck does that mean, right? Our research scientists like it because it's very precise. But as a human being, I would like to know, is Jan doing better or worse?
Right.
Because if you're doing better, I want to know what you're doing. And if you're doing worse, maybe I'll give you a virtual hug. I won't do that to you on stage, but because that's the human thing to do. And so having this conversation with one of our research scientists just a couple of days ago, she says, you know, in order to do that, I need to understand what kind of change is actually meaningful to a patient. Science doesn't do that today. We need to do new science. And that's very worthwhile science to do.
In a dream world, you shouldn't
Yeah.
need a thing like patients like me.
Sure, we'd all be healthy,
Yeah.
but that's not going to change anytime soon.
The system sort of
Yeah,
claims that you have to have
right,
something like that. Really.
right. But it's user experience affecting not just the UX of the website, but it's user experience affecting the science, which is pretty powerful
Isn't
stuff.
there a European or Scandinavian need for such a...
There certainly
such a
is.
thing?
We have a ton of users actually from Europe.
You do?
The challenge is that so far we're all English.
Yeah.
So in Sweden, I think you'd have no problem because everyone here seems to speak great English. If you're in a country that doesn't do that, we're not going to serve you very well yet.
No, okay.
In a few years, we will.
I think we have a question from the floor
Okay.
somewhere. I'm happy if you tell who you are, which organization you represent as well.
My name is David Stenbeck. I'm from Society, which is a consulting firm. And you spoke a lot about situations where you could win different types of organizations over to seeing the value of UX. Mm-hmm. And some of those perspectives were involving them in the process and inviting them out to user tests and stuff.
Right.
In some situations with some of our clients, they'll be mature enough to do that. Other situations, you'll get a brief where they say that, okay, usability is paramount. Mm-hmm. And you'll give a suggestion and then they'll be like, yeah, well, don't spend any time on it, but mm-hmm. it is paramount. And in that sense, there won't be like a user test. There will only be like some guerrilla UX maybe. Mm-hmm. And in that case, is there a lightweight version of like inviting them into understanding the value when you can't really involve them in a full-scale test that would show it to them?
Yeah. Well, two things. One is something I've learned as a consultant is that you just can't take that kind of stuff at face value. So I always ask, why is that good? I tell my teams that actually I don't really get paid to do design. I get paid to ask annoying questions. And so I always say, well, why? Why isn't there time? Why do you not want us to spend time on it if you're saying usability is paramount? And I confront it. I say, look, you're saying this is the value, and yet here's what I'm seeing manifest in this project brief that you're giving me. So let's talk about that. You don't always get to do that inside an organization. I think there's a job security thing that prevents people from doing that sometimes. But to the extent you can, push on that first as your starting point. If for some reason you can't change that, I think honestly the best lightweight way is not even to plan a usability test, but just to say, hey, we're going to go out in the field and we're going to sit with somebody in their office or their home or wherever they're using our product, and we're going to ask them how it fits into their lives, and we're going to ask them to show us a couple of things that they do. And it's usability test-ish, but it's actually bigger picture. It's about understanding how they think and how they behave. And you don't have to do a whole lot of prep to do that. And I find that's incredibly powerful. So I'm not sure if that's a satisfying answer, but it's a real one.
Thank you.
You were actually close to one of the questions I have, perhaps as to sum up what you were saying. Mm-hmm. You mentioned this, that it's so common that you get the answer, we don't have time, we mm-hmm. don't have money for user research. Mm-hmm. Now, give the people here your best argument to use in such a situation. How should you convince the other ones about this?
Where I always start is I work with a lot of clients to do organizational change where they're trying to grow their teams or change their processes or their culture. And so the first thing I do is I examine some past projects. And so I say, let's talk through some recent examples of projects that have gone well or not so well. Let's look at how the project was approached. Let's look at where the project got stuck. Where was time wasted? Where was there frustration on the team? Where was there just a bad outcome of the project? And those past projects are your best argument, I think, for doing things differently. Because you can say, look, you didn't do any research on these things. Look how many of these issues on the project were a result of not having shared understanding of who your users are and what they needed. And often there's a number of things you can trace back to that. And so using their history, I think, is really the most powerful tool. Because I can argue in the abstract that it's a good thing, but you have to look at what does this organization value and frame the argument in those terms. What does the individual you're talking to value? So if I'm talking to an engineer who's frustrated with ever-changing requirements, well, I'm going to talk to that person about how this prevents requirements from changing. If I'm talking to an executive who feels like projects take too long or I don't have enough visibility at the right points, I'm going to talk about how we're going to add levers to do that.
Kim, everybody on stage gets a little gift, of course, to remember you were here. I think it's a little cup.
Thank you so much.
So it's not something that gets stuck in the safety control in the airline.
Okay.
Could you please thank Kim Goodwin with a big hand? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, are you all prepared for the next speaker? Okay, you are? Our next speaker is a man who made a real burnout start in Stockholm, I'd say. He ran a workshop yesterday for about 40 people, so he has already warmed up a little. He comes in from, I think, Austin, Texas. He's the design director at a company called Adaptive Path, and he's got a great title of his presentation called Orchestrating Touch Points. That sounds tempting to me, doesn't it? Welcome, Chris Risden.
Thank you.
Very well.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
The floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Very excited to be here. And I did have a great workshop, so I want to thank the 36 people that attended the workshop yesterday. A really engaged group, high energy throughout the day, and that was a lot of fun. And I talked about experience mapping, this process of sort of looking at a journey, a customer or end user journey over time and space. And this talk is a little bit about abstracting up and looking at kind of what that implies at a higher level of strategy, what it means to sort of orchestrate touch points. And about a week ago, I was kind of putting some touches on my slide deck, and I was kind of lamenting the fact that I didn't necessarily have a really great anecdotal story that I wanted to tell that illustrated some of the concepts that I wanted to talk about when I'm talking about orchestrating touch points. One of those things where you try to do multiple things through multiple channels, like use your mobile phone at a retail store, and nothing syncs, so I can really validate my points. And so I was kind of upset about that. But then what happened is Sunday, I had this sense of careful what you ask for, because it just might come true. And I am putting my house on the market. I'm selling my home in Austin, Texas, because I'm going to be moving to San Francisco soon. And so we're having to do upgrades to our house. And in doing that, we have to do some things so we can kind of get the maximum value of our home that we want to do. And that included upgrading our appliances, our microwave oven, our gas range oven, our refrigerator, our dishwasher. Basically, I wanted to get these stainless steel appliances so that it looked really good in our kitchen that had otherwise been refurbished but had these old appliances. And so what we wanted to do was we were kind of up against a deadline. So we wanted to go to the store, me, my wife, and my 3-year-old daughter. I had already researched online what I wanted. I just wanted very entry-level appliances that were stainless steel, so get that aesthetic quality, and they were all going to be better than the appliances that we had. So I kind of knew the 4 appliances that I wanted, and I thought we're just going to go in there, spend half an hour and say, okay, this is what I want. What's the delivery charge? What's the install charge? When can this happen? Here's my credit card. Let's make this happen. So I go to one of these large retailers that we have in the US that sell hardware, appliances, electronics, clothes, basically a big box sort of suburban department store. And I go there thinking, okay, I just need to kind of hang out, find a sales representative and tell them what I need and get this done. And I tried to do that. I found somebody, I talked to them, and I said, okay, this is what I want. I want this entry-level brand X stainless steel appliance. And they go, well, do you have the item number? I was like, no, I don't have the item number. I should have looked that up, but I just figured, how hard is it to sort of point to the cheapest stainless steel appliance, and that's the one I want, right? And so he was like, oh no, I mean, there's different variations with the different textures and ice maker versus no ice maker. I'd kind of need the item number to help you out. And I said, well, that's okay. I have my mobile phone. I'll look this up really quick and I'll give you the item number so that you can do that up. We'll do this for the refrigerator, and then we'll do it for the stove and the dishwasher, et cetera. So I try to look it up. I go through the navigation on the mobile site. It's fine. It's nothing special, but it's not horrible either. It gets me to the refrigerators, and I'm like, okay, this is what I need. Let me get you this item number. I found the refrigerator. I sort of start scrolling through the page, and I'm like, okay, where's this information? And there was no product information at all besides this image and then some of the stuff that I actually didn't really make any sense of. There was no item number to speak of, and the customer sales rep couldn't tell me, like, oh yeah, we don't have item numbers on the website. He wasn't familiar with it at all. And we're like, okay, so what else do we do? Well, they had this sort of almost a kiosk with this desktop stand that they had a web browser to access their retail website on it. I'm like, okay, well, I guess we'll look this up real quick here. And we're about 7 minutes in. Again, my wife is trying to entertain my 3-year-old daughter. She's going around opening refrigerator doors and kind of trying to keep her amused because this was right before lunch because I thought I was going to get in and out, and we're feeling like we're up against time. And so I do this, I get on the website, and their website, besides being sort of on an old browser and an old computer, is painfully slow. So I'm starting the navigation structure. I'm kind of finding my way, and then every page I do, I get 10 seconds of this before I get there. And so all I want to do is get this guy his item number so that he can tell me how much it's going to cost with all the installation and all the delivery fees. We start to find refrigerators. I finally find the refrigerator I want, or that I had picked out earlier. And I even then find the elusive item number that's going to help this guy. So I give him the item number, and then he goes and we walk down these rows of refrigerators, and he's scanning these little placards that they have on the refrigerator to find what the item number is and which one it is. And we find the refrigerator, and that's great. And we're like, okay, finally. And we're about 25 minutes in to my visit to the store here. And so he starts looking at the placard, and he says, okay, we can take this number down. But I noticed something kind of interesting about when I'm looking at this fridge. I think, I don't know if you guys can see what I see. I was very aware of this because I wanted to spend as little money as possible in investing in my house. So I was very cognizant of the price. And I was like, are you sure this is the same fridge because this price is different? And he goes, oh yeah, so the prices at local stores might differ from the website. I was like, well, I mean, I don't want to pay that much, when I already saw it for the website for $619.99. And he goes, oh, well, we price match, so we'll match that price. And I'm thinking, like, why don't you just have the price that you have, here? And so he price matches, and then he's got like the back of his business card, and he's itemizing, like, okay, so the refrigerator is this, installation fees like $100, and I'm like, that's fine. I kind of knew that would be. A delivery fee is $69.99. And I was like, but there's something else I see on the website. It says free delivery. Like, why are you telling me it's $69.99? Like, oh, well, that's normally what we charge, but yeah, we'll match the price on the website again, too. And so that was about 35 minutes in to get to this point. And then he said, so we do the stoves next? And I was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. And so I said, no, I'm sorry, we don't have the time. And so we left. We got lunch. I went home. I went to another retailer's website. I sourced another 4 appliances off that retailer's website. I went in there, and within 30 minutes, I was checked out. They didn't even have all the stuff I needed. This other retailer had 2 of two of the items. They had like the stove and the microwave, and that they had to call another store about it, but they did. They picked up the phone really quick, and they called another store, and they said, we still need a refrigerator and a dishwasher. Oh, we have that. They coordinated all the delivery together, and within half an hour, I was out of there. And this was just the epitome of how we can do certain things. Maybe their website is pretty good by itself. Maybe the mobile site, maybe it's responsive, maybe it's got good navigation, it's good by itself. Maybe I could go like in the second retailer and I could actually have a good in-store experience, or in this case, I really didn't. Because what this highlighted was these parts aren't working well together. And I started to notice the fact that I was addressing a lot of these issues in my career, and at Adaptive Path, the company I work for, we were starting to notice we were addressing these kind of issues as well. We traditionally think of user experience as being sort of this digital product or digital service-centric thing. You got digital user experience. You're thinking about empathy and design thinking and informed strategy, that sort of user-centered point of view relative to mostly web projects, software projects as well. But what happened at the company I work for over the past few years was kind of organically, we were doing these things and kind of from a ground up. Okay, we have our digital product area here, and we want you to help us improve the user experience of this. And usually it was like a web presence of some sort. And we do that project, and ideally, and hopefully more often than not, we were successful in implementing some real positive change in how they were implementing their user experience for those digital products. And they said, well, when we think about these things, having kind of this empathic, ethnographic point of view or process for understanding who our end users are, implementing some of these changes, there's no reason why you couldn't apply this to other parts of our organization, like the call center or the physical store. Matter of fact, so we would start to do that. We say, okay, yeah, we can help you with the call center, and we can, do research around calls and start to understand like design principles that will inform conversations people are having. It might affect the UX of the software that the call center reps use, but it also might affect the nature of conversations. But we would do that, and then all of a sudden it even grew further. It's like, okay, you're helping these in these individual areas, but they're not all working together. We actually want to help you, break these links are broken here. We want you to actually take a holistic view and look across all these and make sure that these are working completely together. So we're starting to spread out in the organization with an explicit mandate to affect more than just digital through the same types of processes and methodologies that we're using in user experience. And then as well, how do we make this actually happen, like embedded in our organizations? How do we make this sustainable? So we're actually moving up into the organization as well. It's not as ground up as like, let's deal with this product. Somebody at a kind of a middle manager level is hiring us to kind of deal with their one specific product part. It's like that we actually are now like thinking about things like change management and helping to transform the enterprise to think about something that's very sort of user-centered or user experience oriented within their organization and kind of crossing those silos. So what we're doing is we're starting to have to try to maintain empathy while in the face of increasing complexity, more types of sort of products experiences and service experiences, and also going deeper or higher up within and across organizations. And we might frame these in different ways. It might be service design, which has stronger roots in Europe, but especially from a kind of go-to-market sense is starting to come on strong in the US. Often it was associated with like government services, healthcare, but it could be hotels. These things that have sort of less tangible artifacts, not as productized, but nonetheless are really thinking about how different parts of an experience work together. It might be through a lens of the cross-channel or maybe omni-channel, which you might hear for retailers and through marketing. Thinking about how if we have an in-store experience and kind of like my retailer experience I talked about earlier, that has to sort of actually coordinate with the mobile experience or with the web experience or the in-person customer service experience. All those things I tried to utilize in my first story. But even if you're still a digital designer, even if you're still really rooted in the digital platform, and the majority of our projects are still very much digital UX projects, you realize that you're still now dealing, instead of like, we know that people are going to be at a laptop in their homes, or they're going to be at work, at their desk. We now have these multi-platform ecosystems, whereas understanding how something you use on the mobile phone picks up when you switch to a web browser, or whether you have new digital devices that interface with also a mobile app and a web app, or in-screen dashboards that also work with tablets and things like that. All these things are really thinking about how we design experiences that unfold over time and through many different touch points. And that's sort of the changing characteristic of the work we do. It's not that it's been overnight. We've always tackled this stuff in a sort of ad hoc way, but we're now tackling it in a much more deliberate way. And we're bringing in methodologies that maybe we're repurposing from other disciplines. Maybe we're creating new ones like service blueprints, experience maps like I taught at the workshop yesterday. And we're rethinking about how these apply, and there's basically a sort of a convergence that's happening among these disciplines. And if you look at the journey, one of the reasons I've often focused on journey mapping and experience mapping and really looking at like the holistic journey of how this unfolds over time and place. It's not that this is necessarily replacing other methodologies that have importance, like mental models or personas or concept models. But when we're thinking about these new complex services and systems, whether it's through that service design lens or a cross-channel or omni-channel lens or a digital multi-platform ecosystem, the journey acts as a hub. What I call it is as a hub of empathy, understanding, and strategy. And what it allows you to do to use that as your hub is sort of go in multiple directions. You might go in a direction of how you start to support this journey throughout the organization, enterprise transformation. You might roadmap, you might process engineering, it might include change management, enabling design throughout an organization. Or, more often than not, and at least for me, it's also going in the other direction where we're zeroing in. What is a particular touch point in that journey? It's almost like a macro interaction. I need to get something done. I'm going to the store. I need to buy these appliances. And there's a touch point that's happening there. How do we envision what that looks like? And how do we design for that? And you can drill down further and get more tactical. You can think about the interactions that are involved in supporting that touch point. You can think about the micro interactions that are involved in all those interactions, all those features that support the touch point. But the journey sort of acts as this hub that allows us to move in these directions and sort of gives us an anchor around which we can either think about how we support this within an organization or how we take the things that are happening within this journey and actually support those at sort of a tactical level. And so what we really have when we think about touch points, when I'm talking about orchestrating these touch points, is a moment in time. So we can get into semantics, touch points, and user stories, and macro interactions. But really, the framing we might want to use is, there are very important, very critical moments that happen over the course of a journey that somebody has using the products or services that we design for. So really, it's about how do you design to support that moment in that particular time. And what we want to know is what are the interactions that must occur to support that moment, support that touch point. And just as importantly then, what we have to find out are what are the constraints and what are the opportunities that are afforded to us in designing these moments. So let's step back and say, okay, well, what does that mean? What is a touch point? What are channels? What are this sort of these elements that we're talking about when we're thinking about a journey and the experience that kind of unfolds over time? Well, what happens is some of these words get conflated. I mean, they kind of get interchanged and mixed up. And touch points historically were thought of as three things. Either a static touch point, which could be packaging or marketing collateral or outdoor advertising like a billboard. Interactive touch points, and interactive touch points are going to be pretty obvious like websites. They could be software, they could be kiosks. And human touch points, so customer service reps in person or maybe over the phone. All these things sort of are defined as touch points. What I had a problem with was that I felt like this was a little limited. If I was a designer and I was trying to get an understanding of what was I designing for, what's the context that's happening here that I can leverage to actually optimize some design around a particular moment, around a particular need that somebody has at a specific time, this didn't tell me a lot. It didn't inform anything for me. So it basically lacked something that was both human and kind of user-centered, and it lacked something that was actionable and informed me of what was going on there. So in contrast to, say, other things, it's not a channel. Sometimes you can say like, oh, there's the phone touch point. Well, maybe that's a channel, maybe that's a touch point. It kind of gets confused. A touch point isn't a medium, and it's not necessarily a platform either. These things are all kind of words that use interchangeably about where we reach or how we reach consumers or end users. So, through a channel or through a particular medium or through a particular platform. But a touch point, I think, is designed a little bit differently. And to contrast it, we'll start by thinking about, well, what does that mean, a channel? I define a channel as a medium of interaction with customers or users. And maybe 10 years ago, we would have said a channel is a medium of communication with an audience or end users, because things were more static back then, and so that's what it was. It was one-way communication. We interact with so much information now. We have so much less intermediation between the things that are important to us, the brands or the products or the service. And so now channels really represents, when you think of the phone channel, when you think of email as a channel for, say, marketing, if you think of different things that we think of channels, the physical retail store as a channel, the website, the mobile web, these all things are basically points of interaction, less about simply points of communication. So about channels, well, channels are kind of squishy. You can't really create a sort of formal taxonomy or hierarchy of what defines a channel. You talk to everyone from product managers in digital products to marketers. They might sit there and think of email as a channel as a means of interacting with or communicating with end users. They might think of the website as a channel. They might think of the mobile phone as a channel for interacting. All those things can live together though, right? You can get email through a website on your mobile phone. So it's more like facets comprise a channel. But why do we even want to define that? What defines a channel? Well, what we care about a channel is to the extent that it defines the opportunities or the constraints that are afforded to us in that moment. So if we think of the mobile phone as a channel, we can say, well, there's some constraints, right? Well, when we're trying to support this moment, we have to take into the fact that there's small screens, maybe different gestures people aren't used to, distractions, are usually multitasking when they're on a mobile phone. But there's opportunities, right? It's with them everywhere. We have the ability to sort of be with the end user or the consumer all the time. There's sensors that we're leveraging that we haven't ever been able to leverage before. It's networked, so it's always connected. So to the extent that we say mobile phone is a channel is to the extent that we want to understand what it allows us to do and in what ways it constrains us. So when we design to support a moment that involves the mobile phone, we understand what that means. If I have a conversation on a phone, then that's going to imply certain things around having a conversation versus not being able to see a face versus not having to have a linear flow like on a website. So a touch point, in contrast, is a point of interaction involving a specific human need in a specific time and place. So this is an evolution of the old static and interactive and human touch points. It's the idea that there's a specific human need, so it's very user-centric, and then it's a specific time and place. And that's the idea of getting to the context of when this need is occurring and when this interaction is occurring. And again, I'm sure that'll be a common theme, thinking about context. It can't be understated right now. And so this is a new way of thinking about, okay, if you have this moment, what defines it? Well, it defines the fact that you're trying to meet a specific human need at that time and place. That might be a different context on Monday than it is on Tuesday. It might be a different platform. It might be a different channel or sequence of channels that's being used. So a couple case studies. This one is a couple years old. It's Korean's Home Plus virtual grocery stores. And Home Plus, the Korean grocer, is owned by Tesco in the UK, and I think they've extended this into the UK. I think it might even be in Gatwick Airport, I'm not sure. But what happened is, in a high-density place like South Korea, it's hard to sort of find new real estate and very expensive from a capital resources standpoint to create new grocery stores. And so Home Plus, or Tesco's, was trying to think about, like, how can we improve revenues with very minimal capital investment? And so they took spaces in the public, like, say, subway stations, and they replaced what would normally be print advertising, backlit print advertising, and replaced them with virtual grocery stores or grocery shelves. And people could take their Home Plus mobile app, they already did home delivery, and they could scan the QR codes and basically do their grocery shopping while they're waiting for the subway and have it delivered to them by the time they got home. And so this is a moment, right? This is a touch point. This is a need I have at a specific time and place, and that is to purchase groceries while I'm waiting for the subway train at the subway platform. And there's some context I can think about there that will help me support designing that. But it utilizes two channels. So I know I'm I'm afforded opportunities and I'm constrained in different ways because I'm using the print advertising channel as well as I'm using the mobile phone channel. And you can design, and I'm sure they've designed an experience that is just one channel specific, which is to do all your shopping on the mobile phone. And there'll be constraints about, going through lists and going through navigations and all the information architecture that needs to happen in such a constrained place. And so people could do that. There's nothing stopping them from shopping on their mobile phone while they're waiting. But you see that this opportunity sort of gets superpowered when you leverage two channels at the same time. The print advertising space, which means you can kind of scan items easily, and it becomes a little more easily than sort of navigating a limited real estate website. And I kind of have my visual muscle memory. Well, here's the milk, here's the juice, here's the eggs. So these things working in conjunction with each other at this particular moment for this particular context actually create a better experience than just thinking about it through one single channel. The customer, from a customer's point of view, they don't care about channels, but we do. We need to know what limits us and what opportunities we have. Print display, physical environment, mobile technology, all these things are the things we want to understand at our disposal sort of as materials to support this moment in time, this touch point. And the second example I'll use is this is somebody that's confirming their reservation at a rental car agency. This is Hertz Rental Car. In the US, you go outside of the airport, you go to a giant rental car center that has all the rental car brands, Hertz, Avis, Budget. And what you need to do is you have a confirmation number, you have to accept or reject insurance and confirm the price and the details. And so what he's doing is he's at a virtual live agent or a live agent through a kiosk monitor. So this is a touch point, right? This is a need he has at this time and place, which is to confirm his reservation and get to his car. There's a lot of things that are happening that are supporting this. The wayfinding would be considered a channel in a typical sort of branding or marketing standpoint. The virtual agent that he's talking to, so he's talking one-on-one with someone sort of in real time, even though it's somebody who's remote and not there, and he's using a handset. The physical space that tells him whether he can talk to a real agent or this virtual agent or an in-person agent and the virtual agent. The kiosk that's touchscreen. Someone's designing that touchscreen, and hopefully they're considering the fact that that's also happening while somebody might be talking to somebody as well. And then there's his phone, right? He might be on email or on the Hertz app looking up that actual confirmation number. So these things are sort of working together in conjunction to support this particular need at this particular time. So to take that metaphor forward, we want to orchestrate our touch points. We want to know what each instrument is doing and how and when they're doing it. And to take it even further, if you think of a touch point as a musical note, and those musical notes happen in sequence, just like touch points over a journey, that single note can be played by one instrument or many instruments. And so that single touch point can be supported by one channel or many channels. And lastly, with regards to this point, if we think of this person has this need, right, and then we have an organization that has a value proposition that they want to put into action. They're hopefully, if they're going to meet this person's need, they're putting their value proposition in action to help that customer. And so when these things come together, we think about this touch point. And what we want to think about as designers is we want to think about how to support this. And then what we really want to think about is how do we support this over time when we're really supporting this as this unfolds, this experience unfolds over time and space, different locations, different contexts, different mediums or platforms or channels, however you want to talk to them. How do we support these? And you can start to think about like how you line this up. Here are these set of needs. Here are these set of touch points. Here are these moments that occur. And then here are the things that we have to take in consideration that are either going to constrain us or give us opportunity. And the thing we want to think about to keep it human is the way I frame my research from sort of a journey standpoint is at any given key moment, I want to know what people are feeling, thinking, and doing. Again, thinking about building up the context. The feeling is the motivations. Why are they doing this and how are they feeling? Is this something they want to do? Is this something they have to do? Is this something they're excited to do? The thinking is about framing and about the mental model. How do I expect this to work? Is there a gap in how I expect this to work? And also, what are my questions? And what do I think is going to happen? And where am I confused? And the doing are the behaviors. And so the behaviors are really going, in a sense, back to the channels. What are you physically doing? If I'm calling a customer service rep, I want to know that the behavior is that I'm physically talking and having a conversation. If I'm at a kiosk, I want to know that the behavior might be I'm using a touch screen. And then that's building context so I can understand how can I design to support that touch point by understanding what the physical behaviors are, as well as what their mental model is for it, as well as what their motivations are for it. And what we can hope to do, if we use touch points as a framing element, is better describe and characterize and even measure these touch points. And I'll step back and say that, I used to think, in my digital product world, I used to think about features, right? We think about the features of a digital product system, the features of a website, the features of software. But as I've had to expand out, I've realized the features the idea of features can be filled with landmines because everyone sort of has a certain amount of baggage or a certain amount of perception of what that features means. And once you're talking about operations and customer service agents, once you're talking about information design and physical stores, features don't necessarily carry forward. They're sort of limited to the digital realm. So that's why I think touch points has become something that sort of it replaces features in some context because it describes something that can be extended beyond just software interface capabilities. But we go with clients and we go through these like touch point worksheets to help us understand, well, what needs to support this touch point? What are the dependencies? What are the characteristics of it? We ideate around the touch points as well. And we start to set standards of what should make a good touch point. If we want to have this great moment in time, if that's really what it comes down to, the use of a feature or the engagement as a touch point is what makes that good. Is it appropriate? Is it appropriate for the context? Is it appropriate for the culture? Is it relevant? Does it meet needs? Is it functional? Is it meaningful? Does it attain some level of importance or purpose? Can it be endearing? Can it be subtle and playful and maybe even delightful? You might not hit all of these, but if you hit one of these, and you also make sure that it's connected, that it feels like it's part of it, that's what happened in my retail experience at the beginning. Everything was disconnected from each other. These types of things show that, okay, if we have this qualitative measurement, at the very least, if not quantitative, if we have this qualitative measurement, then we can start to really design to support this moment with a sort of an aspirational sense of what it should feel like for the end user. And we can start characterizing them and kind of creating a vocabulary around what type of touch point this is. There's probably very sort of archetype points of touch point. There might be touch points that can only occur with certain channels. It might be a touch point that is about continuing the journey or continuing the flow, like enabling the next step. A couple of examples is password recovery and product returns. Again, what are the things that sort of apply both to digital world as well as the physical world? Well, a characteristic is that product returns and password recovery are sort of both about repair or recovery. You're kind of off your journey. You didn't like something or it's broken, so you have to return it. You can't move forward because you forgot your password. So what are the things when you think about a touch point that you can kind of characterize as repair or recovery? What are the things that you think that you typically know you need to do to make that a really good moment or a really good touch point? Or maybe you have something like this. In this case, it's whenever you use a new computer when you have to log on to your financial institution. At least in the US, you have to validate the computer. Something like the cookies or whatever won't recognize that and will say, well, maybe this isn't a trusted machine. We want to prevent fraud. So what you're going to do is to validate this computer, we're going to send you a code either by text message or SMS, or email or SMS, and then you're going to come back here and you're going to enter that code. So that's a specific need at a specific point in time, which is to validate my computer. And that allows me to go to another touch point, which is a new specific need, which is maybe to transfer money from one account to the other. And then how do we support that? And so what characterizes this? Well, maybe because it's sequential, it's going to be a flow of 2 or 3 steps. And maybe because it's required. I have to do this to move on to the next step. And so what can we think about when we know those characteristics about a touch point? So in some ways, I mean this a little metaphorically, but in some ways, every touch point should have its own value proposition. We know it's sort of living to maybe support the overall value proposition, but I kind of think that a touch point, we think about like scope creep and features and all these things. Well, if you give everything that exists as a moment that you want to support its own value proposition, the need it's trying to meet, then it's going to justify its value and its contribution to the overall journey. And it's going to hopefully adhere to maybe one of those principles of being contextually relevant or meaningful or endearing. So I think a good example of this is something that our CEO, Brandon Schauer, posted on a blog post about 1.5 years ago. And he noticed this disparity, and I think this is not global, I think it's US, but I bet you the ratio is pretty similar in any westernized country, is that we spend about $40 billion on advertising spending in the US per year. But we only spend about $2 to $5 billion in planning and designing of services. And what really illustrates this is what Kim talked about with the United advertising. It's the idea that we're spending a lot of money setting expectations about something great, about this value proposition we want to put into motion. And we're setting those expectations, but then we're not delivering on that. There's a big disconnect. We're not, it's sort of a false promise. And Brandon called this the service anticipation gap in SAG. I think he picked it because it was this kind of negative sounding acronym. But the idea of the SAG being this idea that, the United example Kim showed was a perfect example where, they're selling this promise, right? And everyone knows that it's a false promise because they're not actually investing in money. They're investing lots of money in that marketing and they're not investing enough money in their customer service. And there's a big gap there. What he's hopefully promoting and where I think we're starting to see, and it's also hopefully going to be a boon to us as professionals, is the idea that there'll be a transition of spending from that. It might be incremental, but if we're talking billions of dollars, incremental is still a huge amount of money. When we're shifting some of those dollars from that early traditional ad spend into the service investments, as long as we can make them highly measurable, as long as we can think of and justify that that's going to be where the long-lasting investment is, and that we can get those increasing returns. And what that'll mean is more of us thinking about this user-centered process, but across systems and platforms, and from everything from not just web apps to customer service, to how these things integrate in the real world. An example here is there's a company called Comcast. It's a media company in the US, owns other companies, but their main thing is that they provide cable television, so coaxial cable television service to, I don't know what percent, but a huge percent of the American population. It's not an exaggeration to say it's one of the most hated companies from a brand standpoint in the US. If you ask somebody in the US, they're not going to have a positive impression of Comcast. Basically, same reason that United is having a problem too. Their customer service is horrible. Their service delivery ability is horrible. If you want to get your cable installed in your house, it's a big pain in the butt. If you have a problem, it's a big pain in the butt to get it repaired. So they're not very endeared in the US. But they're trying, they know this, right? But they're also an epitome of this service anticipation gap because you'll see they're spending on the ads. Comcast brings you all this great entertainment and it's emotional and we're connecting you to, big events and things like that. But then, the service delivery is really horrible. So this was just in USA Today, I think like last week. I just saw this and I integrated it in. I usually don't have big quotes in there just because I don't want a lot of reading, but I thought it was worth noticing that the Comcast CEO, Brian Roberts, vowed Tuesday to bring Uber-like quality to the company's much maligned customer service. Are people familiar with Uber here, right? So you get kind of the premise that they're using. Uber is fantastic, he said, wielding his iPhone to demonstrate a new Comcast app that lets customers schedule an appointment and troubleshoot set-top boxes remotely. I need to be able to push the button and see where my truck is. We're going to make our service look like Uber. Well, Uber is actually a good example too because on the surface it's like, well, that's kind of what we do. We make these new apps that help be intermediaries to connect, services to customers. But what's different about Uber today than if something like Uber had come out, say 5 or 6 years ago, is they're owning much more of the full customer experience. They're insuring drivers, they're qualifying drivers, they're offering different support systems to that. So it might be sort of app-powered, but it's whether you call it an ecosystem or a service in itself from a service design standpoint, it's taking a different approach. And that's why it becomes this example that a company like Comcast has to reference to say, please believe us. We're going to try to be like them, so maybe you'll have a halo towards us. Whether or not they deliver on this, I have no idea. I'm very skeptical, but at least they started having to think about, okay, it's not about the ad spending. It's about we have to invest in these things that actually help them troubleshoot set-top boxes and schedule appointments and the things that are really about service delivery. And so if you think about what questions we have to sort of answer for ourselves or the things we have to take into consideration when we move forward, we have to think about creating new and redefining existing staff roles. What will it mean to be a user experience practitioner? Will that always be limited to, thinking about digital products and then we sort of have to put on another hat when we want to kind of go outside that view? Or is it the role of a user experience designer become something that's more, cross-disciplinary and we're thinking in a wider context than just digital products? Changing internal metrics to measure a cross-channel experience. So most companies you talk to can sit there, if it's transactional, and say like, okay, this is how many people acquired auto insurance on our website, and this is how many people acquired auto insurance by calling us and doing that. But they actually have no idea what the cross-channel experience looks like. They can't tell you that the person got on the website, got stuck on a question, had to call customer service, got a little further in the process, and then went back to the website. All they know is it got completed on the website, so the website's where that transaction happened. How do we start to measure and track the cross-channel journey? And then developing new business functions to support the sustainability of desired experiences. Well, so what that means is if this is a new model where we're starting to rethink how companies are supporting this, we have to think about moving things from being projects to being programs, being longer-term sustainable support systems. Then this is going to start in January. We're going to release something in April, and it might not get touched again for another 6 months until we get new funding for it. These are the things we have to think about as these roles change for us. One last example, Airbnb, I don't know how familiar you guys are with this here, but it's a service to help people who have extra space to let, whether that's an extra bedroom or an unused house or an apartment where they travel a lot and it's free. So it connects people to that, and there's rating systems and there's good validation. They offer insurance to the people who are letting their flats or their apartments to people. So they're kind of like Uber in that on the surface it's like, oh, we're creating a website that's richer than, say, going to a classified ads thing like Craigslist or Backpage. But they're actually owning much more of the full service experience. And they're growing right fast. If you think of them as a hospitality concern, if you think about them like that, they have the 5th most rooms available in the world among hotels, if you kind of metaphorically think of them as a hotel, even though they're distributed rooms. And so I read this on the plane coming over here yesterday in the US version of Fast Company. And it says, Airbnb commissioned a Pixar animator to storyboard an entire trip experience frame by frame. The 30 slides now hang around Airbnb's product studio, each radiating empathy for each particular emotional moment in a trip. The guest's arrival at the airport, her transportation, the first interaction with the host, and more. So this is looking a lot like these service design tools like customer journey mapping or service blueprinting. They're really saying, like, what is the way we can look at this end-to-end experience and still keep it very user-centered or very empathic? And how can we get the context of what is that emotional moment? That's basically saying, what's the context of happening here? What's the frame of mind that they're thinking about? They're saying when we critique our designs, we literally say, which frame is this helping to improve? And you could substitute touch point or moment for that. What is the moment that we're trying to improve when thinking about a new design? Or you think about the moment, and it's like, what design can we have? So the end result is our roles are shifting and they're expanding, and there's a lot still in motion that we have to decide about what that means and what the implications are. But at the same time, if we think about this confluence of customer experience, service design, and user experience, it does still seem like a very positive opportunity for us to grow as practitioners while still staying core to our core ethos or our core values of being user-centered, being empathic, and thinking about improving the lives of people's, improving the lives of people who use these products or systems, and even with an expanded opportunity of not just being digital, but being even more immersive in the way we can touch them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you do me a favor?
Sure.
Could you rewind your presentation to the slide where you give the almost philosophical definition of touch point?
Almost
you go backwards?
philosophical.
With a specific human need and all that?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Almost there.
Because being an outsider, this just proves to me that your touch points, they have been around since somebody created mankind.
Probably, yes.
Yes. Now, could you give me an example of a perhaps traditional organization or body who has transferred good old traditional historic service to the digital age?
I think it's a tough question. I don't know if there's many, off the top of my head, many sort of transformational stories like that. I can't name the client name, but we work with a large financial institution in the U.S. They're not one of the as well known. They service a very targeted market, and they have a really high affinity with their membership. That's what they call the people that actually use this service as a financial institution. But they were a very traditional banking service, and they sort of embraced this type of point of view, of thinking about these moments and thinking about these touch points. And they use terms like cross-channel and omni-channel that are being pretty common, but their goal is still like, how can we meet the member where they are? Meaning, is that through the mobile phone, or is that through physical stuff? And they've done a really good job of creating those touch points that actually work well together. And an example would be that you can have an auto accident if you're insured by them, and of course you can then literally map out what happened on the auto accident through the iPad app, and if you need to, you can call a customer service rep directly through the iPad app if it's connected, or through the mobile phone, you can do the same thing. You can record the accident as it happens, and if you need to, you can call them right there through the app. And so they're starting to integrate, like, how does this thing do the things it needs to do at the right point in time for the end user?
Yeah. But I mean, is there some kind of a link between a general service attitude and a true will to create something good new on the web?
Yeah, I mean,
You think so?
I think so. I mean, it goes a little bit to Kim's talk, where organizations that are doing this typically have some set of values that they want to adhere to. They feel like they maybe have a mission statement. And that means they're motivated to sort of do what it takes, break out hierarchies or silos to just make sure that they're meeting those needs of those end users or those customers. And so I think there is a link to sort of the point of view of the company and their ability to actually enact these changes.
You were talking about maintaining empathy.
Right.
How do you do that?
That's really about consistency. I think sometimes, and again, there's a common theme like justifying research. What happens is if you sometimes do get the money to justify research, it's sort of this one-time thing, right? Okay, we're going to do this research, and that's going to inform product design. Maybe in 2 years we'll get to do some research again. So really, there's a couple things that need to happen to maintain that empathy. And one is that the organization has to make this a consistent program. I talked about kind of going from projects to programs. So a project might call for a research endeavor, and once that project's done, you might not do any more research. A program might call for research to happen every quarter, every week, twice a year, whatever that interval should be, but it happens consistently. And what also happens is when they get approved for research, some researchers go out and do the research, and no one else from the organization is often necessarily brought along for the ride. They might see the results of the research, and so they don't have that firsthand sense of empathy because they're not involved. Again, Kim talked about saying, like, if I can bring those stakeholders to a couple customer interviews, that goes a long way. And I think making sure that enough people within the organization are sort of along for the ride and are actually participating in seeing this stuff happen are those types of things that sort of start to ingrain empathy within an organization.
I think it was so funny that you chose this example with a rental car company because they are useless.
Yeah,
they're absolutely useless in these aspects normally.
They really can be.
And it takes hours to get your car, and there's so many practical things.
And you're tired.
They really
you're off the
have
plane.
something to work on.
Yeah, and you were thinking about like what to support that moment. What's the context you need to know? Well, most people are those business travelers. They're weary and they're tired, and so speed and efficiency are going to be probably really key. And are they able to support that without a huge commitment of being some sort of prime super duper member? Or can they support just the average person?
Let me know if there are questions from the audience. One more thing. Perhaps you should go forward again to the slide where you showed the difference between ad spending and service design spending.
If I can get through my builds.
Get it soon. Thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
Because my question about that is that you are questioning a proportion between these two.
Yeah, disparity.
Yeah. So I wonder, what would an ideal relation be then? Should it be the opposite? Or
no,
what?
I don't think it's going to be opposite. I guess it's, let me get the full build. I guess it's not necessarily the opposite. I guess mostly because I'm a realist that I don't think that'll happen. right? And Brandon, who really highlighted this, if you look at the funnel, the light green is where you see that you're just shifting some of those ad dollars into and widening where those investments are later in the service investment. So even he's not proposing like a flip-flop. He's proposing just move some of those in there. And I think he says that that's what the trend is. I think people are we have a more direct relationship with our products and services, right? Because they live in our pocket, or they live on the websites, or they live on our tablets now, or they're embedded devices. So we don't necessarily need that intermediary, which could be the marketing spend that tells us that there's a store way over there. Well, that store actually already lives in my pocket, so I don't need that intermediary. So I do think there's just there will be a trend where that money will go away because it's not needed. It needs to be in the investment, in the fact that the brand lives with me, so invest it there versus as an intermediary. Do I think it'll be a flip-flop? No, and I don't, just because I just don't think that money will fully go away. It's just too easy to think when you think of the Uniteds and you think of the Comcasts that we're referencing, that they kind of have to feed that beast. And they're, if their services
are you sort of implying that you UX people have been too bad in promoting your knowledge and your competence?
Well, I think I wouldn't say that, only because I think we've come a long way. I mean, if you think of the experience practice, Adaptive Path as a user experience consultancy has been around for 14 years. And the fact that we are now able to penetrate organizations is saying something. The fact that this is sort of a thing, whether it is user experience or whether it is service design, these are penetrating organizations, and some organizations are transforming. Could it happen faster? Sure. But I think we're actually doing a really good job of making an impact.
Question from the floor. Where are you?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Martin Einer from Whiteboard.
Can't see you. Where are you? There. Thank you. Great.
I'd like to have your view on home entertainment systems. Still we have like 3 or 4 remote controls just to get the sound and the picture going.
Right.
How is it possible that we still have 3 remote controls in our living rooms? With
Very
all of
good
these
question.
efforts being made.
Well, I mean, again, that is a digital ecosystem issue, and I do think it probably comes down to standards, right? If different brands don't want to play nice with each other, there isn't going to be necessarily a holistic solution. I think what Google's doing with Chromecast, and now Amazon, I think literally yesterday or Tuesday, my timing's off with the time difference, just released their own thing. I think it's still just going to be incremental, and we might have to rethink what the remote is to a certain extent. But the simplest answer is going to be standards. If there was a standard in which they worked with different devices and stuff, then all of a sudden it wouldn't be such a challenge. You could use a remote for multiple purposes.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have just heard Chris Riston.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Time for a snack, friends, a break. It takes a little time to move out and in. Please be back 11:15. Thank you, 11:15.